The sound came at exactly 3:17 a.m. Daniel wasn't supposed to be awake, but the strange noise had forced his eyes open. A faint, whispering static. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, the kind of noise your brain creates when the world is too quiet. But then it came again, a low, distorted crackle, like an old radio struggling to find a signal. Daniel slowly sat up in his bed. His apartment was completely dark, except for the faint orange glow of the streetlight leaking through the blinds. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the room. He listened carefully. Static. Then silence. Then static again. His heart began to beat faster. Daniel lived alone. There was nothing in his apartment that could make that sound. At least, nothing that was supposed to be turned on. He slowly got out of bed. The cold floor made him shiver. The static grew louder. He followed it across the room, toward the old wooden desk in the corner. And then he saw it. The radio. An old, dust-covered analog radio that hadn't worked in years. Daniel stared at it in disbelief. He hadn't touched it since he moved in. In fact, he was almost certain it had never worked at all. Yet now, the red indicator light was glowing faintly, and the speaker was alive with whispering static. Daniel hesitated. Something deep inside him screamed not to touch it. But curiosity pulled him closer. He reached out slowly and turned the volume knob. The static exploded into a harsh, distorted hiss. Then suddenly, a voice. "Hello." Daniel froze. It wasn't a broadcast voice. It sounded like someone speaking directly into his ear. Weak, broken, desperate. "Can you hear me?" Daniel's throat went dry. He looked around the room. No one was there. The voice came only from the radio. "Please respond." Daniel whispered back instinctively. "Who is this?" The radio crackled violently. Then silence. Then a sudden burst of white noise that made Daniel flinch. For a moment, he thought it was over. But then the voice returned, stronger now. "You're not supposed to hear this." A chill ran down Daniel's spine. "What do you mean?" The voice didn't answer. Instead, the radio began emitting a strange rhythmic sound, like distant footsteps echoing through a tunnel. Step, step, step. Daniel turned the tuning dial. Different frequencies produced different sounds. Some channels emitted low growls. Others sounded like crying. One channel played what sounded like reversed human speech. Daniel's hands trembled. He stopped at a frequency that sounded wrong. There was no static, no noise. Just breathing, slow, heavy, right next to the microphone. Then suddenly, a scream. Daniel jerked his hand away from the radio. The scream cut off instantly. The room fell silent. His heart pounded so loudly he could barely hear anything else. He stepped back slowly. The red light on the radio flickered, then went out. Daniel exhaled shakily. Maybe it was a dream. Maybe he was still half asleep. But then, the radio turned back on by itself. This time, the voice was clearer than ever. "Daniel." His blood ran cold. He had never told it his name. "You opened the signal." Daniel backed into the wall. "How do you know me?" The radio emitted a low hum. The voice spoke again. "We've been listening." A sudden thud echoed from the apartment hallway outside. Daniel's head snapped toward the door. Silence. Then another thud. Something was moving out there, slowly, dragging. The radio crackled again. "Don't open the door." Daniel's breathing became shallow. He grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter. The hallway light outside flickered under the door. Shadows moved beneath the crack. Something was standing right outside. Then the voice whispered urgently. It heard the signal too. The doorknob began to turn, very slowly. Daniel held his breath. The radio suddenly emitted a deafening screech. The hallway noises stopped instantly. The doorknob froze. Silence. Then the voice returned. "This is only the beginning." Daniel collapsed into a chair. His mind raced. What had he just connected to? And why did it know his name? The radio began playing a series of numbers, slowly, one by one, like coordinates or a countdown. Daniel realized something terrifying. The signal wasn't random. It was targeting him, and somewhere. Something had already started moving toward his apartment. Outside, the streetlight flickered. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls. The radio whispered one final sentence before falling silent. "Stay awake." Daniel stared into the darkness, because deep down, he knew one thing. If he fell asleep, he might not wake up again, and far away, in the unseen static of the night, something had just realized he could hear it. The whisper from the radio faded into silence. "Stay awake." Daniel sat frozen in the chair, staring at the old device like it might suddenly explode. The red light was off now. The room was quiet again, but the silence felt wrong. Too deep, too heavy, like the world itself was holding its breath. Daniel rubbed his eyes. Maybe he was hallucinating. Maybe stress had finally broken his mind. But then something cold brushed against his ankle. He jumped up instantly. The kitchen knife clattered onto the floor. He looked down. Nothing. Just the dark wooden floor reflecting the faint glow of the streetlight. His heart pounded so hard he thought he might pass out. He bent down slowly and picked up the knife again. The radio sat quietly on the desk, dead, like nothing had ever happened. Daniel backed away from it. One step, then another. He needed air. He needed to think. The apartment felt smaller now, like the walls were closing in. He moved toward the window and pulled the blinds aside. Outside, the street was completely empty. No cars, no people, no sound. The streetlight flickered weakly. And for a split second, he thought he saw someone standing beneath it. A tall figure, perfectly still, watching the building. Daniel blinked. The figure was gone. He let the blinds fall shut. His hands were shaking uncontrollably now. "What is happening?" he whispered. The radio turned on again. No static this time. Only breathing. Slow, wet, right behind him. Daniel spun around. The room was empty. But the sound continued, coming from the radio. "You looked outside." Daniel's throat tightened. "Yes," he whispered. A pause. Then the voice spoke again. "It saw you too." A sudden bang echoed from somewhere in the building. Not his apartment. Somewhere deeper. Like a door slamming far away. Daniel's skin prickled. The radio began emitting a low-frequency hum. So deep he felt it vibrating inside his chest. "You shouldn't have answered." The lights flickered violently. The hum grew louder. Daniel covered his ears. "Stop," the radio obeyed. Silence again, but now. There was another sound. Footsteps. From the hallway outside. Slow, dragging. Daniel held the knife tighter. The footsteps stopped directly outside his door. He could see the shadow under the gap again, but this time it was wrong. Too tall, the shadow stretched upward across the opposite wall. Like something that didn't belong to this world. The radio whispered urgently. "Don't breathe." Daniel froze. He held his breath. Seconds passed, then a minute. Then the doorknob began to turn. Very slowly, the metal clicked softly. The door creaked open just a fraction. Daniel's lungs burned. He wanted to scream, but he stayed still. Then suddenly, the shadow vanished. The door stopped moving. The footsteps resumed, walking away. Daniel collapsed to the floor, gasping. The radio crackled again. "It's learning." Daniel stared at it in terror. "What is?" A long pause. Then, "You." The lights went out. Complete darkness swallowed the apartment. Daniel fumbled for his phone. The flashlight flickered weakly to life. The beam cut through the darkness and revealed something on the wall. Words, written in black, fresh, dripping. "Stay awake." Daniel staggered backward. That wasn't there before. The radio turned on at full volume. A chorus of voices screamed from the speaker. Hundreds of whispers overlapping. Numbers, coordinates, warnings, threats. Then one clear voice rose above the chaos. It's inside now. Daniel dropped the phone. The light went out. In the darkness, something moved, very close. He felt cold air brush against his face. Then a hand, long, thin, not human, touched his shoulder. Daniel screamed. The lights came back on. The apartment was empty. The radio was silent. But the message on the wall remained. Stay awake. Daniel realized something horrifying. This wasn't just a signal anymore. It was a doorway, and something had already stepped through. Outside, the streetlight exploded in a shower of sparks. The building fell into darkness, and somewhere in the city, other radios began to turn on. Other radios began to turn on. Not just in Daniel's building, not just in his street, but across the city, across the darkness, across every silent place where old signals still slept inside forgotten machines. Daniel stood in his apartment, staring at the dead radio on the desk. His chest rose and fell rapidly. His mind was breaking apart piece by piece. "What did I do?" he whispered. The knife in his hand trembled. Outside, a faint chorus of static began to fill the night. Not loud, but everywhere. Like the city itself had started breathing. The lights flickered once, then went out again. This time they didn't return. Only the cold glow of distant fires lit the skyline. Something was very wrong. Daniel slowly walked toward the window. His footsteps echoed too loudly in the silence. He pulled the blinds aside again. And what he saw made his stomach twist. Hundreds of red lights, blinking, in windows, on rooftops. Inside cars, radios, all turned on, all listening, all whispering. The signal had spread. Suddenly, his own radio burst to life again. So loud it made him fall backward. The voices were clearer now. More organized, more focused. Connection established. Host identified. Entry stabilized. Daniel's ears rang. "What are you talking about?" he shouted. The radio answered. "You answered first." A deep rumble shook the building. Not an earthquake, something heavier, something moving. The walls began to pulse. Like veins, black lines spread across the ceiling. Daniel watched in horror as the apartment itself began to change. The corners stretched. The shadows grew deeper. The space felt wrong. The radio whispered, "Reality is only a frequency." Daniel staggered toward the door. He needed to escape. He needed to run. But when he opened it, the hallway was gone. In its place stood an endless corridor of static. Walls made of flickering images, faces, memories, unknown places, all distorted, all watching him. Daniel stepped back. "No," the radio spoke again. "You tuned in. Now you stay." Something emerged from the corridor, tall, impossible. Its body flickered like a broken transmission. Its face was never the same twice. Human, then not. Daniel dropped the knife. His hands were numb. "What do you want?" The entity tilted its head. Static poured from its mouth. To be heard. Suddenly, Daniel's own voice came from the radio, repeating words he hadn't said yet, predicting his thoughts, predicting his movements. The realization crushed him. The signal wasn't external. It had entered his mind. His consciousness was becoming the transmitter. Every fear, every memory, every thought, broadcast. He ran down the endless corridor, but there was no escape. Doors led to rooms that no longer existed. Windows opened to black oceans of noise. Time itself seemed to bend around him. Days passed, or seconds. He couldn't tell. The signal kept speaking, teaching, changing him, until finally, he stopped resisting and listened. Outside, the city fell silent. People vanished from streets. Lights stayed on. Radios kept whispering. Weeks later, a new voice appeared in the transmissions. Calm, familiar. "Can you hear me?" It was Daniel. But not Daniel anymore. Now he was part of the signal. Part of the thing that waited. Listening. For the next person to answer. Somewhere in another quiet room. Another radio turned on at 3:17 a.m., and a new nightmare began. The end.